I'm Dr. Manuel Astruc. I'm a board-certified psychiatrist. I help entrepreneurs who are suffering from depression get back to being energetic, productive, and very confident. Why is it important to talk about mental health with entrepreneurs? I've got a friend, Justin Breen, who had been downsized from a company that he was working for and then built a different company that is showing massive growth. But to get his first customer, he says he had to talk to over 5,000 entrepreneurs. And subsequently, he's talked to a lot more. And one of the things he says is common with entrepreneurs, he says, these four things, most people have at least three, many of them have four. But number one, massive amounts of anxiety and stress. Number two, significant clinical depression. Number three, bankruptcy or almost bankruptcy. And number four, some significant life-changing trauma at some point in their lives. Entrepreneurs, they take a beating and they keep on ticking. The reality, and again from another one of my friends, Kevin Christie, he says there's a massive difference between being the person who's signing the front of the check versus the person who's signing the back of the check. Recently, David Ramsey, who has a massive entrepreneurial company that deals with everything from financial peace to leadership, big media presence. They have just started a podcast on mental health issues. Entrepreneurs are facing so much stress running their companies. And one of the things that is common to entrepreneurs is isolation. And the way that we solve problems as entrepreneurs is to put our head down and just keep working harder. People go into entrepreneurship to get freedom. The reality is that less than 16% of companies that get started ever make it above $1 million in revenue. And the amount of work that it takes before the company can become more self-running is just massive. Now, along with this, we're looking at the fact that there's more mental health issues nowadays than at any other point. Patients are always asking, why is there so much depression? Why is there so much anxiety? And the answer is really kind of looking backwards over how humans have evolved. 70,000 years ago, there was a cognitive revolution where Homo sapiens, something happened, and we took over the planet, right? We were the first, or one of the early invasive species. Our ability to create, to work together, to imagine something that had not ever existed and to make it come true. One of the early pieces of artwork from that time, 70,000 years ago, showed a statue of a man with the head of a dog. People were imagining and creating things that didn't exist in other places. But the cognitive revolution led to hunters and gatherers that spread out all over the world. And hunters and gatherers were the main form of Homo sapiens until about 10 or 12,000 years ago when the agricultural revolution happened. That led to villages and towns and communities, specialization of labor. But we were still living very different than we live today. It's only in the last 500 years that we have the Industrial Revolution, and in the last 100 or so years that we've got planes and trains and media and television and the internet in the last 20 years. The pace of change and the amount of information that we're exposed to has changed dramatically. And our brains are still the brains of hunter-gatherers that were living, 70,000 years ago. We haven't really had a chance to catch up to the amount of stress that we have. Stress historically, when we look at hunter-gatherers, were episodic times when you were under assault and were in danger of losing your life. So a lion came to eat you, or there was a fight with another tribe, but there would be a period of time when adrenaline would spike and cortisol would spike. The adrenaline would help you in the very short run to live, run for your life, fight for your life. Cortisol was a response that was started in case you got injured. But these were hormones that kicked in rarely. We were rarely in life-threatening conditions. Nowadays, people are living on the edge of stress, anxiety, fear. More often than not, these same hormones that were supposed to be episodically used, that's what they evolved for, are now active all of the time. Let me tell you a story. There's a researcher who does research on orangutans, and he goes to Africa in the summer times, and he studies orangutans. And these orangutans live in different parts of Africa. They have different niches that they're in, but there's really no natural predator for a group of 100 orangutans. Like, nothing messes with them. And some of these orangutans live in resource-rich areas, so they can forage and get their caloric needs met in 2 or 3 hours a day. Some of the orangutans live in resource-poor areas. It takes them 8 or 9 hours to forage and get all the dietary needs and calories that they need to live. And the researcher studies stress levels, stress hormones in these different tribes. And what he finds is that the tribes that have more time on their hands have significantly higher levels of stress. And the reason for this is that when they have time on their hands, they have time to mess with each other, right? It's a very hierarchical, a top-down society. Can't get my words out today. So there's a big boss who gets, irate or bored and beats up like the next baboon that's out there, orangutan, and so on and so forth. It just kind of trickles down, and everybody's on edge. No one knows what's going to happen to them. Very, very stressful. The orangutans that are, having to hunt and like search for food, they don't have time to mess with each other. And within tribes that are in resource-rich areas, there can be also differences in the amount of stress based on the culture within these tribes. So in some tribes, there's a lot of the combativeness and irritability, and in others, there can be a lot more nurturing, and the behavior that they look at is grooming behaviors. So even within different tribes, within the same community, ecological areas where the resources are rich, you can have a breakdown of stress levels based on how a culture is. This is what entrepreneurs are dealing with all the time, dealing with their cultures, dealing with stresses of society, and dealing with keeping the lights on for all their employees and their customers. One of the areas that we're using TMS for are entrepreneurs who are suffering from burnout and stress. They're having a hard time with their productivity, with their energy levels, with their engagement, and it puts them at risk of not having a company survive if they're not on all the time. And he was incredibly interested in what the results that we were getting here are. But there's no question that one of the areas that needs to be highlighted and talked about and support given is for entrepreneurs and their mental health needs.